Bob Burchell from Rutgers University is one of the premier economists and researchers in the issues that are important to planning. And I'll let him do the details on his background, but suffice to say, the reports he has authored, the books he has written, have been informing Southeast Florida planning procedures for a very long time, and he knows more about this region than any other single person from Brunswick, New Jersey.
Let me tell you, can you hear me? Let me tell you who I really am. I came down here at one point, and this was when Shamu was on your coast, and the back room was open. There were 250 people in the audience, and someone yelled in the back door, "Last chance to see Shamu the whale." 200 out of 250 people left, including the other people who were on the panel. So that's who you are in terms of competing against other more natural forces. Let me just go over today some trends that I think you're going to find important as they affect your region. And really what it is going down from the world level to the nation, to the state of Florida, and also then to your southeast region, to see essentially the effect of what would be these types of trends transmitted to lower and lower geographies, so that you just see that you're not part of a region, not part of a state, not part of a country, but really part of a world that's in transition with enormous changes that are taking place. So let's begin. And I only have 20 minutes, so we have to go quickly here. Okay, let's take a look at the world and what the world is going to look like in 2050. The population of the world in 2050 will be 9.1 billion. India will be the largest and most populous country in the world at that point. Projections show in 2020, not 40 years from now, but 10 years from now, if we take a look at 100 people who occupy the face of the earth, 56 will be from Asia, 16 from Africa, 13 from the Western Hemisphere, only 4 from the United States, 7 from Eastern Europe, 5 from Western Europe, 3 from the Middle East. So the world is a big place, and the world is growing. The important thing to understand, in a very, very special way, the rate of growth is decreasing, not increasing. Growth is increasing, but the rate is decreasing. Why is that rate decreasing? That rate is decreasing because many of the developed countries in the world are actually losing population or not increasing significantly in population. So their rate of growth is decreasing over time. All of the growth in the world, or much of the growth in the world, is taking place in non-developed or less developed countries. Okay, let's give an example of that. In 1950, the population of Europe and Russia constituted 22% of the world population. By 2050, 100 years later, it'll only be 7.5%. Changes are really taking place in the world. Russia's population itself will contract from 141 million to 120 million. 2060 will be like 1960 in Russia. And what is the reason that that's happening? Lack of fertility, not as many children, and also significant mortality, again, that needs to be taken control of. Male unemployment, and we'll see that in the United States. Male unemployment is extraordinary. Women keep their jobs better than men do. So in advanced countries, those that earn over $12,000 per capita The significant problem is male unemployment. Let's take a look at China. In 2050, China will have 1.3 billion people. It'll have 300 million over the age of 65 with little social infrastructure to take care of that population. In India, in 2050, 1.7 billion, the majority of which is expected to live in some of the most impoverished conditions in the world. Many families in India, and to a greater extent Africa, do not participate in a cash economy. So children's work has value. As a result, children are produced significantly in those cultures. So the only point that we're trying to make here, and the takeaway, is that the United States today is the third largest populous country in the world, the third most populous country in the world. In 2050, it'll be the third most populous country in the world. And everybody out there has their own problems. Okay, so no one's eating the United States lunch. We're going to be around in 2050, and as a matter of fact, if you take a look at the United States with all of its problems, the United States is the largest country with the least frailties of the top 5 largest or most populous countries in the world. Okay, let's take a look at working age population. How are we going to go forward in terms of our ability, to work? And what we see here is that in working age populations, countries, and especially developing countries, are losing their working age population. This is as a result primarily due to immigration policies. The United States is not. Canada is not. And so what we see is that if other countries adopt immigration policies, and ours has a lot of problems, but adopt immigration policies not unlike the United States, they can deal with their working age populations, which are decreasing. Now, why do you worry about a decreasing working age population? You worry about a decreasing working age population because that's the population you have to support with some type of retirement or other types of systems, almost non-existent in many of the countries outside the developed countries in the world. So what happens if Europe changes its immigration policy? Is it going to feed the United States the type of residents that it fed it before? The answer is no, because Europe is no longer the dominant contributor to immigration in the United States. Okay, some national and regional trends, and these are important trends. The U.S. population will be 380 million in 2040 and 420 million in 2060. Significant growth. We're 310 million today. So significant growth over the next 30 years and then 20 years beyond that. From 2000 to 2010, the United States increased by nearly 30 million. Where did that growth take place? It took place essentially in 2 regions of the United States. I tell all of my students when they graduate, don't stay in the Northeast, don't stay in the Midwest, go to the South and the West. Okay, the South and the West have extraordinary growth rates relative to the Northeast and the Midwest. So the growth, again, in the United States, significant growth, but it's happening in 2 regions of the United States. For you, an important fact, because obviously you're part of the South. And these regional patterns that we're talking about, although growth may decrease somewhat over the next 30 or 40 years in the United States, the regional distributions of that growth will continue. First sub-trend with regard to all of the trends that are happening, immigration. Why do you talk about immigration? You talk about immigration because immigration is growth. At least half, in some cases 3/4, of any type of entity's growth is due to immigration. Natural increase, again, on a countrywide basis, being the most significant other component. So until the 1960s, basically immigration was controlled to a European source. After the 1960s, it was opened up, and as a result of that, we get, in the United States today, relatively equal immigration from all parts of the world. What does that mean? It means for the first time in 2050, Caucasian Americans will no longer be a majority, will be 47% of the population. And this is also contributed to from forces from within. Again, different fertility rates being part of our own population. What's another significant trend? Another significant trend is multi-generational households. And why do we talk about multi-generational households? We talk about multi-generational households because, number one, they're increasing tremendously in the United States. We have Granny living with us. We have Meathead living with us. And these, believe it or not, and we'll go to the next slide and see, are the dominant characteristics of who lives in multi-generational households. Why are multi-generational households important? Multi-generational households are important because they lift us out of poverty. They lift us out of poverty. Everybody who lives in a multi-generational household is doing better than conventional households. So let's define first a multi-generational household. Number one, 3 families under the same roof, 3 generations under the same roof. Not a 3-family house, but 3 generations under the same roof. An expanded definition of multi-generational housing, grandmothers taking care of grandchildren, no children present, grandmothers and grandchildren. And another expansion of that definition, older people taking care of older children, providing residences for older children, Meathead and his friends, essentially. Okay, when you add all of those up, 16 to 20% of the population of the United States. And that's particularly important for this region because immigrants from Latin America and also from Asia essentially adopt those multi-generational lifestyles more than other parts of the population. Now, the multi-generational household rate is not going to fall in the near future. It's going to increase in the near future. Why? Because the incomes of the baby boomers support that lifestyle. If we take a look at who lives in multi-generational households, older women. My mother-in-law, I've been married for 47 years. My mother-in-law moved in 35 years ago. I'm a saint. I am an absolute saint. My father-in-law passed away, and my mother-in-law came in, and she said, I can live here. And I said, well, look around, see what makes you comfortable. And she said, and went to the master bedroom and said, this looks great. My own closet, a bath, I'm set. And she's lived in the master bedroom for 35 years. Great woman. So older women, younger men, and as a result of that, everybody's doing better. Everybody's doing better who lives in multi-generational households. For unemployed people, they do better by twice. Unemployment for unemployed people, the poverty rate in multi-generational households is only 17.5%. The poverty rate in all other types of households is 30%. Multi-generational households, again, will diminish as the baby boomers' wealth transfers from 2030 to 2050. Interesting phenomenon in the United States. Generation X, we're 45 to 64, the baby boomers. Generation X is somewhere 65 to 81, and Generation Y is around 81 to 2000. That generation doesn't have enough money, secret. Only you are going to find this out. That generation doesn't have enough money to buy our housing. Pay attention. They have the numbers, they don't have the assets, they are tied up with student loans to an enormous degree. Now, so the reality of it is that if you want to be in a hot housing market, where do you go? You go any place where the baby boomers are buyers, not where they're sellers. So any place where the baby boomers are buyers. Interesting areas, bohemian type locations, shore, recreation, any type of place where the baby boomer would be a buyer, that's where the housing market is going to be hot. Because you're going to have all the baby boomers still buying, not selling. Again, some of the next two generations also participating in that buying. Okay. What's going to happen after they can't buy our housing? What's going to happen is we're going to give them all of our money. The greatest wealth transfer in the history of the United States will take place from 2030 to 2050. So after we essentially are not able, in many cases, to get out of that housing that we have, we will turn around, and from 2030 to 2050, we will give away $41 trillion to our offspring in Generation X and Generation Y. Part of the future. So that's coming. Happy? In 2010, let's pay attention. In 2010, let's go to another trend, marrying out. Why do we talk about marrying out, and what is marrying out? Marrying out means essentially you're marrying out of either your race or your ethnicity. Significant trend in the United States today, marrying out of race or marrying out of ethnicity. Some 9% of whites, 17% of blacks, 26% of Hispanics, and 28% of Asians marry out of their race or ethnicity. And why do we worry about that? We worry about that because generally speaking, if that happens, everybody does better. They do better than if they stayed within their original group. So if you take a look at as an example, white Asian couples. Again, their average household income is $71,000. This is household income, not family income, so it's supposed to be lower, $71,000, which is a high household income, where white and Asian are only in the low 60s in terms of household income. So generally speaking, marrying out is an upgrade and an upgrade on income. Marrying out varies by geography, highest in the West. The South and the Midwest are about the same at about 13%, and least in the Midwest. The Northeast and the South are about the same at 13%. The elderly. Two trends. Women are coming and the elderly are coming. I'll talk about women in a second, but let's pay attention to the elderly. In 1970, seniors comprised 10% of the U.S. population. By 2010, it was 13%, not a significant increase. By the year 2050, 21% of the U.S. population and nearly 25% of Florida's population, the elderly. Now, we really don't know what the elderly mean until we lump the elderly in terms of buyers, in terms of new households being formed. So if we take a look at the elderly, what characterizes the elderly is that they're childless households. And so if we take a look at other childless households, not only the elderly, but empty nesters, and also new households coming into the market, we see that households without children were half the population in 1960, two-thirds in 2005, and 3/4 by 2040. But here's the shocker. 90% of all of the households formed between roughly now and 2040 will be childless households. 90%, 9 out of 10 of every household in the market is going to be a childless household. Let's take a look at what we're experiencing today. We're here today. What happened today? 8,000 people turned the age of 65 today. 8,000 people. We stay till tomorrow, it'll be another 8,000 people turning the age of 65. So we're aging, and the childless household is going to dominate into the future. The women are coming. The women are coming. The gender ratio in accepted freshmen in the United States is 60% women, 40% men. We bring in men at Rutgers for social purposes. The real players in graduate school, are women. Often we give a degree or we give an award for the best two, and often it's a male and a woman. We don't tell everybody that the other 11 underneath were all women in terms of their progress in graduate school. That's not all women are accomplishing. In married couple households, women now provide 47% of all household income. In married couple households, women provide 47% of all household income. In 2008, 63.3% of those women counted themselves as either a breadwinner or a co-breadwinner. Only 27% in 1967. And today, men versus women, the point I made earlier, are much more vulnerable to losing their jobs. And so in the greatest recession that we had, of those who lost their jobs, 80% were men. It wasn't called the greatest recession. It was called the man session. The man session, because so many men lost their jobs. Okay, so let's take a look at these kinds of trends as they impact on Florida. And let's take a look at Russian and Japanese, which will increase in tourism and residency. Europe is linked to the euro, so there'll be significant tourism and some residency also on the part of Europeans. The law of large numbers means that anything that happens to a large number is large. So even though it's going to be a small percentage, Chinese tourism and Chinese residency will pick up in Florida and in South Florida. And we're already experiencing that in that Asian, in terms of immigrants to Florida, now exceed those from Latin America and the Caribbean. Sustained immigration from South Central America and the Caribbean. That's going to be a staple. And a counter trend is that if Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico strengthen their economies, that could draw down the number of people that come essentially to South Florida looking for employment. Also, if Cuba opens up, that could be a counter trend in terms of the draw of people not necessarily coming from Cuba, but rather going to Cuba to either seek employment or seek residency. Okay, trends and population flows. Florida was one of the 5 fastest and largest growing states for the past 70 years. Again, the population of about 19 million today, 2040, 26 million, 2060, 31 million. Population in Florida was slowed and even negative during the Great Recession 2 or 3 years ago. It went negative. Population now in Florida is moving forward at a clip pace, and Southeast Florida is leading the way in terms of component areas of the state. The Sun Belt, the southern third of the United States, of which Florida is a part, will continue to garner the most significant amounts of employment growth over the next 30 to 50 years. Florida will be one of 9 to 11 super regions in the United States, reflecting wealth and promise. So good times are ahead for Florida. 9 to 11 super regions, of which Florida is one, essentially will dictate the shape of the United States in the future. The South will get, including Florida, significant increases in Hispanic immigration. And one of the things that Florida has to pay attention to relative to this change is that there's a very different pattern as these immigrants age between essentially Hispanic immigration and their needs as elderly and the typical northern person who used to come to Florida in the 1950s to 70s and their individual needs. Okay. Marrying out trends will continue to increase and continue to affect Southeast Florida. 41% of intermarriages are Hispanic and white couples. Florida, the fifth state, the fifth oldest state in the United States, not the first, the fifth. In some cases, Maine, Rhode Island, and others ahead of Florida in terms of the percent elderly, will increase its age. Florida, again, at one point was youthening, if that's a word, I think it may be. As a result of its immigration, it is no longer youthening. It is impacted by the baby boomer retirement and those also retiring in place. Overall, Florida has 23.3% of the elderly, a significant amount, again, the fifth largest in the United States, and expected to increase over time. The college gender transfer ratio will hit Southeast Florida as more Hispanic families enter the mainstream. Women will reverse representation and their trends on private and public boards as their education and wealth increases over time. Women's ascendance in Florida, go girls, women's ascendance in Florida could exceed national and regional trends. Women in Southeast Florida will continue with their own blue-collar employment, health and service industries, okay, and gradually move into the male-dominated white-collar employment, including the male-dominated white employment hierarchy. Miami-Dade, and less so Broward, will continue to be numerically dominated by immigration. Immigration will largely be from South Central America and the Caribbean. Palm Beach, Martin, and St. Lucie, Indian River will have less numerical increases but larger percent increases in Hispanic populations due to immigration. The increase in foreign-born will increase in all Florida counties. In Southeast Florida, Florida will become older in Southeast Florida, and the foreign-born population will become older in Southeast Florida. The tug-of-war between immigration from the South and migration from the North will be won in the short run by immigration. And so this is what we are to expect. Migration plus aging in place of the elderly will continue to increase the age of both Florida and Southeast Florida. Florida, if we take a look at it, again, 19 million population in 2011, 6.2 million in Southeast Florida. A continued loss of northern migration, the old resident coming from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Continued loss of that to Arizona and California and Colorado and other places in the West. In addition to that, there's going to be a loss of that in Southeast Florida to other places within Florida, to Middle Florida, to the Northwest and Northeast Florida. So there's not going to be as much northern migration to Southeast Florida as there has been in the past, and this is going to be replaced by south to north immigration. North to south migration will be concentrated to the degree that it remains more in Indian River, Martin, and Palm Beach counties, and less in St. Lucie, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe counties. If we take a look at natural increase will happen in two components of the population. Southeast Florida will grow slower than Florida as a whole in the future, but faster than the U.S. and faster than most southern states. So Florida is going to grow. It always does. Southeast Florida may grow somewhat slower, but it'll grow faster than all the southern states as an average and faster than the United States as a whole. Middle Florida will begin to take on the dominant persona in Florida. So the Orlando area will pull from all areas of Florida and will grow in sophistication and strength in terms of its presence within the state. And Southeast Florida will experience a growing trade with South Central America, the Caribbean, and unemployment will be initially high, but the region will be poised for a significant recovery. Good things are going to happen to Florida in the future, and the 2050 plan is going to be part of it. Thank you very much.